The sun set 2 hours ago, but the heat hasn't gone anywhere. It's the hottest part of a hot summer in South Bend and probably the wrong night to keep watch beneath the Darden Bridge. Probably the wrong place for it, too. When the settlers first marked this stretch of river, they called it Mosquito Glen. You'll still find the name in old maps and older books. The name faded. The reason for it didn't. The biting bugs are out tonight, stirred to frenzy by the heat and the thick, wet air. But still, we watch and we wait. Because on a night like this, we'll know the apparition when it arrives. They say it comes with a sudden, biting snap of cold, a breath of winter in the heart of summer. And on a night like this one, and for just a moment, it might even feel nice. Of course, that's what the lost hunter thought too, at least before the chill consumed him from the inside out. The beast we're tracking is called the Wendigo, hungry, sinister, gluttonous, and according to Native American legend, ancient almost beyond memory. The stories say a Native American hunter once returned from too many days alone in the woods. He'd gone in search of deer, or maybe something else. But whatever he found instead, it changed him. He mumbled in his sleep, frightened the children. The dogs wouldn't go near him. And even on the hottest days like this one, his skin was cold to the touch. Worst of all was his appetite. The man could not be satisfied. He would tear through the stores of dried squash and beans while the others slept. And if there was ever a fresh kill, then woe to the one who stood between him and the meat. These were the signs of the Wendigo, an oral story that had been passed down for generations. Even then, there had been the doubters, those who whispered that the tale was a legend and a fiction. But when they inspected the man's lodging and saw the massive cache of bones, stripped clean of flesh and cracked for marrow, they realized that they could not have been so lucky. They went to the elders, and the elders could not abide the beast among them. So they dragged the hunter down to the banks of the river, a river we now call the St. Joseph, near a place we now call South Bend, and they dared him to look at his own reflection. That's when the river opened. Some say the Wendigo came for him that night, rose up from the current with burning coal eyes and fingers too long for a man. Some say it dragged him under the water as payment for his hunger. But others say the hunter became the Wendigo, that the hunger passed from whisper to body and from body to beast. And some say even now, when the river runs low as it does after a long, hot, dry summer, you can still hear him calling. You can still feel his chill. Which means tonight promises to be a long, hot, quiet night. At least until all of that changes. Hello and welcome to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. I'm your host, Aaron Helman, and during this series we are going to dive into some of the spooky stories that you'll find around Michiana, from ghost stories to true crime to unbelievable myths, legends, and folklore. We will take a few historical liberties with the content of some of these stories because by nature, they're rooted in rumor and legend and not historical fact. But that doesn't mean we won't learn plenty of history along the way. And my goal is to help you learn something, stay entertained, and maybe scare you out of your socks while we're at it. During the course of this episode, you'll hear fictional advertisements for very real historical companies and products. We do that to help break up the podcast, provide some levity, to include just a little more history than we could otherwise, and to give you a sense of the time and place when and where all of this is happening. And now, with all that out of the way, let's jump into our first episode with some of the oldest legends from the region. Native American myths and legends centered right here on the St. Joseph River. We'll start with the river itself and the supposed supernatural origins of its name. but not the name that you know it by. That's because before it was the St. Joseph River, long before Jesuit missionaries planted crosses in the soil, or French explorers traced its bends onto their crude maps, the river had other names, older names. The Miami people called it Sakawasipi, meaning outlet river, because they followed its flow to Lake Michigan. The Potawatomi called it Senathewan-Ziba, or it goes through the towns, in reference to the many villages that lined its banks. French voyagers often called it the Riviera de Miamis, in reference to the Miami tribe, and early maps used that name interchangeably with La Riviera de Saint Joseph. Over time, the latter stuck. It became official, Christianized, and colonized. But according to some storytellers, even before Senathewan-Ziba or Sakawasipi, the Potawatomi had another name, a stranger one, Sheggwe. It meant mystery river, and depending on who was telling the story, the mystery referred not just to the water, but to a man who would appear unbidden like mist rushing off the water, a man who arrived without footsteps and left no sound, a man who was, perhaps, not a man at all, but a ghost, a spirit, a legend. They say it began on a misty morning, one of those spring days when the river forgets how to hold still and the fog clings to the trees like breath. The gatherers had gone down to the riverbank to check the traps when they saw him on the other side of the water, alone, barefoot, calm, standing on the banks as if he'd always been there. But no one had seen him arrive. He didn't speak, didn't move, didn't carry any tools or wear the clothing of any nearby nation, just stood in the reeds with a quiet kind of knowing. The people said he came like a mushroom, here one moment, not here the moment before. They said he just appeared. He returned sometimes, never at the same hour, never in the same season, always wordless, always still, and always just appearing. But what was he? Certainly not a man, probably not a god, maybe a ghost. But most of the storytellers told that Sheggwe was the spirit of the river. In their stories, Sheggwe the river and Sheggwe the apparition were one and the same. The apparition meant no harm and promised no danger, but existed as a reminder for everyone who saw him, and everyone who heard the whispers about him later. The reminder was that the river was alive. The Potawatomi, like many Algonquian-speaking people, viewed the world as alive with spirit and not in a metaphorical way. The trees, the stones, the wind, and most especially the water were spiritual beings with agency, memory, and sometimes moods. Anyway, on this mosquito-bitten night beneath the Darden Bridge, we don't see Sheggwe on the banks of the river, but then maybe it's too hot for him too. That doesn't mean we won't keep looking, and when we get back from the break, we are into another story, one marked with tragedy and longing.
In 1852, the best brewed beer in South Bend is Measles, and more importantly, it's the only brewed beer in South Bend. Crafted to the highest Old World standards of the German state, Measle beer always satisfies. Grab a pint today at the Measle Brewery on the corner of Washington and Michigan. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Not every ghost story begins in death. Some begin in shame, and some begin with a kernel of truth, like the story of Pau-Koo-Shuk. Pau-Koo-Shuk was real. You can find his name inked onto the Treaty of Tippecanoe, signed on October 26, 1836, one of dozens of treaties that steadily stripped the Potawatomi of their homeland. This one, signed at the mouth of the Tippecanoe River, demanded that the tribe surrender vast territory in northern Indiana and southern Michigan, including South Bend. In all, nearly 2 million acres were ceded in exchange for promises of annuities, agricultural tools, and relocation assistance. The treaty makers claimed it was fair, But history and memory tell a different story. 3 years after Pau-Koo-Shuk signed the treaty, the U.S. government swooped in to make sure its terms were met. Armed soldiers, under the command of General John Tipton, marched more than 850 Native men, women, and children to a designated reservation in Kansas. It was a 660-mile journey. They marched for 2 months. They buried the first child on the second day, then another one, and a third. By the time they crossed into Missouri, at least 40 had died, most of them children, claimed by illness, starvation, and exhaustion. The U.S. government called it a removal. The Potawatomi called it the Trail of Death, and to Pau-Koo-Shuk's great shame, his name was on the treaty that made it possible. That's where the history ends, but that's not where the story stops. Pau-Koo-Shuk's life had begun to unravel long before the horse-backed soldiers commanded the death march. Perhaps it was bad luck. Perhaps it was just a whiplash of generational trauma. Or perhaps it was a curse, spirits angry that he'd signed the land over instead of fighting for it. The first blow came with the death of Pau-Koo-Shuk's mother at the hands of Pau-Koo-Shuk's own father, Chief Abu Nabi. According to legend, Abu Nabi killed the woman in a blind and drunken rage, and a council of elders found their chief guilty. They sentenced him to death. The tradition required that a woman's son avenge his mother's death, and so Pau-Koo-Shuk was tasked now with killing his own father, which he did, finding the man drunk and ending him with a single tomahawk blow. The elders named Pau-Koo-Shuk their chief in the aftermath of the execution, but it was little consolation prize. Pau-Koo-Shuk had lost his family, and the white men would arrive a few weeks later to take his land too. His land gone, his mother dead, his father executed at his own hand, and now, in his only act as chief, he would be forced to march west and watch as his own people died by the dozen. But according to some of the storytellers, the worst was yet to come. Once the trail of death reached the Mississippi, the legend tells that Pau-Koo-Shuk refused to cross it, fleeing in the middle of the night and abandoning his tribe to whatever horrors would come next. We're well into speculative history at this point, and while some storytellers will tell you that Pau-Koo-Shuk descended into insanity, others will tell you something even more improbable, that he spent the rest of his days drunk as he staggered back to northern Indiana, a man without a family and a chief without a tribe. By all accounts, he didn't live much longer, but his death did not set him free. Some say that the ghost of Pau-Koo-Shuk came back to Lake Maxinkuckee, where he can still be seen paddling his canoe on the water during dark and misty nights. Others say he landed on the St. Joseph River near Howard Park, where he stands near the water watching the current. Wherever he is, he's not under the Darden Bridge tonight. It's not one of those misty nights, and anyway, we're not particularly close to Howard Park. The legend of the tragedy of Pau-Koo-Shuk is a story with a beginning that's difficult to find. It might have been a story propagated by white settlers, eager to paint displaced Native Americans as violent cowards and drunk savages who deserve to be sent away. It might have been propagated by other Native Americans, a warning against the fate that was waiting for anyone who would sell out his own tribe and their ancestral lands. And of course, it could just be that Pau-Koo-Shuk is out there somewhere, wandering the old trails between Lake Maxinkuckee and the St. Joseph River, looking for a whisper of an old home that he will never be allowed to enter into.
You need underwear. And when you need underwear, you need A.C. Staley. A.C. Staley's woolen underwears are perfect for hot days and cold nights. Remember, wool doesn't retain moisture, and that means no more stink. Why, you could wear a pair of Staley's several days on end before you give off a smell. Don't believe us? Take the challenge. Wear a pair of Staley's for a full week and see if anyone notices. Woolen underwear by A.C. Staley is available wherever fine goods are sold. And now, back to A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum.
Like they do in all cultures all over the world, folk tales exist to explain the unexplainable, to teach traditions, to shame villains, to honor heroes, and sometimes just to teach a lesson. The legend of the Wendigo is not a story that is unique to the Potawatomi of northern Indiana. It's a story that's been told across the Great Lakes for centuries, a story possibly older than Jesus. If the Wendigo is real, he's got a pretty wide range, and maybe that's why he's not here beneath the Darden Bridge tonight. Wendigo stories extend as far as Minnesota, and it's a lot cooler up there right now. The Wendigo story varies slightly across cultures and since made up state lines, but the bones of the story remain the same no matter where or when you go. There's usually a hunter who gives in to the temptation to be selfish. Maybe it starts with him taking just a little more than his fair share, sneaking extra bits of food, stashing a bit of the kill for himself instead of bringing the whole animal back to the tribe. Soon enough, the man is withholding food from the tribe, eating beyond his fill in a cave, and then returning empty-handed but looking very well fed. As it turns out, selfishness begets selfishness, greed begets greed, gluttony begets gluttony. The more the man eats, the more he hungers, the more he drinks, the more he thirsts, the more he takes for himself, the more he desires. In some tellings of the story, it sounds as if the man has been possessed by the Wendigo, that the gluttonous monster has seized upon him and stolen his free will. But in the best tellings of the story, the man simply becomes the Wendigo. In the end, the sum of his selfish choices has transformed him into a gluttonous monster far beyond the point of no return. Finally, when the transformation is complete, the Wendigo is left barely recognizable, gaunt and emaciated, its desiccated skin pulled tightly over its bones, bloody lips, vacant eyes held too deep in the eye sockets. The Wendigo gives off no body heat, only the odor of decay and decomposition. The final curse is that the Wendigo would be trapped in eternal starvation and driven to compulsive cannibalism. A bad thing for the Wendigo, to be sure, but even worse for the tribesmen who had the misfortune to become his dinner. The moral of the story is an obvious one, and the tale is a useful one for training and teaching little ones to behave in a manner that benefits an entire society. The bit about that frozen chill of the Wendigo helps to reinforce the message, a reminder of the dangers of gluttony, every time an unexpected breeze fills the trees and makes the little hairs on your neck stand up. Or maybe it's not a metaphor at all. There are more stories than you would imagine about Native Americans with cannibalistic psychoses, and not all of them are as ancient as you would hope. In 1878, a Native American named Swift Runner butchered and ate his wife and 5 children. He was executed at Fort Saskatchewan. The explanation? He was a Wendigo. In 1907, a Native American medicine man was arrested for homicide. His defense? He was hunting and killing Wendigos, not people. The defense held up. He was pardoned. It goes without saying that scientists have rightfully cast aspersions on all mentions of literal Wendigos or any kind of Wendigo psychosis that might drive a person to cannibalism. But that hasn't stopped pop culture from making a villain of the monster, including in movies, novels, and even in Marvel comic books. There are, of course, those who swear the story is true. All of this begs an important question. Why are we waiting to find this thing on a hot and sweaty night beneath the Darden Bridge? If the cannibal story is all made up, then we're just wasting our time. And if it's real, then this thing is definitely not something we want to run into. We move to pack up just as a chill breeze arrives from the north and the hairs stand up on our necks. We pack faster. Hey, thanks for joining us on A Bend in Time, presented by the History Museum in South Bend. There's more history waiting for you at historymuseumsb.org. I'm your host, Aaron Helman. The theme music is Whose Distance Is It Anyway by Neil Carmichael. Our next episode will dive into the legends and rumors of a mysterious race of giants discovered beneath Walkerton. Until then, keep learning new things, and remember, everything is fascinating as long as you stay curious.